Leeds, and has interest in digital culture, including film culture. And she's got a book that's going to be out any minute now with Tamasys called
Decolonizing the Museum.
Decolonizing the Museum. Okay, over to you, Thea.
Thank you. It has a grandiose title, but that was imposed upon me. Yes, so I'm back again, duffing up on the tech. If you'd like to check the chat, I'm already contacting all sorts of people about things that I shouldn't be. But I'm absolutely delighted to be asked to chair this panel. So we're swapping over to Latin American film criticism, kind of originating in the UK for this panel, and to two absolute household names really in Latin American film criticism as it has been written in this country, and whose the other thing that I really like about this panel is the way that your two papers come together to centre on the role of mediático, which is something that obviously it's a platform that I have thoroughly enjoyed, that I have used over the years, that I've published on, that I've encouraged students to publish on, and that I was recommending it to my first year students only the other day for some of the interviews that you'd got on it. So it's a real pleasure to be able to chair this panel focusing on that. So our first speaker is Professor Deborah Shaw at the University of Portsmouth, who's going to be talking about making a case for expert academic popular criticism, the case of Alfonso Cuarón's Roma from 2018. Okay.
Thank you very much. So I'll go straight into it. I'm just reading to make sure I stick to time and say what I want to say. Everyone can hear me, yeah? Yes. Okay. So in the digital age, everyone's a critic, or everyone thinks they're a critic. The internet has provided us with a democratizing tool, as anyone with internet access can opine on the latest trending Netflix series and engage in discussion with a virtual community of viewers. The opinion sharing is intimately connected with viewing, as posting our views has become an integral part of the experience. In addition to this, viewers can access filmmakers' interpretations of their work, and they can reveal to us the meaning of key scenes and provide a wealth of information on the filmmaking process via interviews, Twitter accounts, and making of features that are available on DVDs for those of us who still buy DVDs, or on YouTube or on Vimeo. This has led to a crisis in criticism, according to Cecilia Syed, as these paratexts amplify the auteurist voice at the expense of the critic and can suggest that the critic is redundant. As Cecilia Syed observes in Film Criticism in the Digital Age, the crisis in criticism springs from a fear that the critic may be disposable, unnecessary when it comes to giving us access both to the film and to the author, whose presence via personal websites, Twitter accounts, or blogs could potentially forego professional critics and mainstream media. In her article, she examines the tensions between creativity and analysis, argues they're not new, and places them in a historical context. I also wrote about this in a very untheorized way in relation to my book on Guillermo del Toro, Alfonso Cuarón, and Alejandro González Iñárritu in 2013, in relation to del Toro's role as guide in his making of DVD, with specific reference to Hellboy 2. And I have a slide with the words I used here, plagiarizing myself. So if I go to the next slide, please. The DVD commentary, it's a bit small, but anyway, I'll read it. The DVD commentary establishes Del Toro as the authoritative voice within the world of the film. He thus creates a self who's both the organizing presence behind the text. So I was basically arguing how Del Toro creates a sense of himself as auteur through the use of the making of DVD on his DVDs, but also acts as kind of critic, almost making us feel redundant. So it's almost like we don't need critics because he tells you what it means, he tells you where to pause, he says rewind this a little bit and you'll see that. So that's really what I was saying here. In a way, you know, we could argue that this process creates a form of redundancy for the critic. With Roma, even on Netflix, once again, the director, Alfonso Cordon, apparently does the job for us and supplies us with a new form, a reinvented form of DVD extra, which is the making of film, documentary film on Netflix, Camino a Roma, Road to Roma. And I have a slide just for you to see this. And I really recommend watching this. It's very watchable. The making of documentary on streaming platforms. I just find this very interesting that we now have making of documentaries on streaming platforms. But it's likely to be the new model that will replace the DVD making of featurette. But also it will inevitably the resources will only be made available for high profile films and award-winning films, as in the case of Roma. So, for example, in the case of Camino a Roma, Road to Roma, Cordon goes through in great detail how he recreated the set to capture the Colonia Roma from his childhood. We have, behind the scenes. He explains how he cast the extras, paying attention to ethnicity and gender and class in terms of how he allocated extras to each scene. He tells a very personal story of how when he was filming his father leaving, he felt really sad throughout and he couldn't work out why he was in such a terrible mood. And then he realized that he was actually filming his father's leaving the family. So, this kind of behind the scenes intimate access is something that critics can't provide. So it's something critics can do that filmmakers can do that critics can't. But of course, I'm going to go on to make a case for why we're still of value. Following a traditional model, critics are either paid professionals working for respected news outlets or trade papers such as Variety, who attend festivals or specially arranged screenings and get to see films before the rest of us, becoming gatekeepers of quality. Critics may also be a select group of academics who are usually working in film festival studies, who may blog about films or write for specialist film outlets such as Sight and Sound, in addition to their academic outputs. These critics have access to the latest films pre-release, and they set out expectations and provide us with viewing material, and thus play their part in canon formation. Other critics are slow academics who publish articles, books on films, months or even years after their release, and map patterns or make wider societal, political, or aesthetic points about films, film movements, important themes, or national and transnational trends. However, the streaming model pioneered by Netflix and the resulting global availability of some films, traditionally only available to those with access to travel funds or with privileged relationships with directors or distributors, has dramatically shifted these paradigms and enabled a new critical model that blurs the boundaries between professional critics and academic critics. And just while I was reading that, I was thinking about those of us who have young children and can't travel or have had young children. So there's a kind of whole new democratizing function in the availability of films via streaming platforms. More of us are able to see new and important hot films as soon as they're released, meaning that the professional critics lose their insider status and time advantage. This and the increasing number of online open access publishing outlets designed for academic popular writing, such as The Conversation and our own institutional blog sites, allows us, academics, to take on the role of semi-professional critics, albeit without pay, and have a wide reach through these new forms of open access, quick time publishing. With the plethora of critical voices, including those of the filmmakers, what then is the role of regional expert critics, and are we still relevant? In the remainder of this talk, I aim to answer these questions and examine whether there's added value provided by academics as critics through a discussion of a series of rapid response digital critical readings of Roma by Alfonso Cordon. I'm assuming most of you have seen Roma, so I'm not going to go through it in great detail, but just a very, very quick overview. Roma is a Mexican, Spanish, and indigenous language film, Mixteco, shot in black and white as an art film. It's a highly personal project by Cordon that features Cleo, played by Yalitza Aparicio, a domestic servant working for a middle-class family, a character based on the Cordon family servant Lobby. It's an intimate film of Cordon's youth in the Mexico City district of Colonia Roma, which blends Cleo's story with the director's family history and national history in the context of 1970s Mexico. Netflix chose Cordon's semi-autobiographical drama as the flagship production for its new distribution model. That is the release of quality films on its platform with a very limited simultaneous theatrical release. And due to Cordon's auteur status, the company didn't hide it away, as is the case for most non-English language productions, at least those of us who are in Anglophone countries. In one of its specific genre descriptions, such as films about women who clean and are usually ignored. Little joke there. There's a paradox here, as Cordon used his author status to get the film made, widely distributed, and then he partially erases himself to tell someone else's story, Cleo's, but that point is really for another talk. Netflix featured the film in order to highlight itself as a serious player in the distribution of quality art films, reportedly spending over $25 million promoting the movie, a staggering amount. Netflix are notoriously cagey about their data, yet we do have some figures, albeit not provided by Netflix themselves. Nielsen, which began tracking Netflix in 2017 and employs a combination of audio and digital data collection, found that Roma was watched by 3.2 million US households in January and February 2019, according to the data it supplied to NBC News. 1 million of those households watched the movie over the Oscar weekend because of its nomination. Nielsen didn't have viewership data dating back to the movie's premiere in November and doesn't count mobile or international audiences. So we can imagine the numbers are much higher. These are just US figures over a very short period of time. And we do know that Netflix has in the region of 203 million subscribers worldwide in 2020. So it's worth pausing to marvel at the magnitude of so many viewers watching a black and white Spanish and Mixtec language Mexican art film. The film's global availability allowed for a new critical model and resulted in a number of special issues in an example of what I'm calling fast academia. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So I'm not going to have time to go into this, but just to give you examples of some of these fast publications. So we had what Latino critics are saying about Alfonso Cuarón's Roma in Remezcla in 2018. And then the next slide, we also had a special issue of Film Quarterly, also focusing on Roma. However, the first special issue, and this is remarkable, was released within 10 days of the film's release on the 14th of December 2018. And that's in the next slide, please. So Dolores Tierney and Olivia Cosentino produced a special issue of the academic blog site Mediatico with Latin American film academics. They, principally their achievement, and we, those who contributed, achieved this because of the potential of digital open access publishing, because Latin American film academics were excited about the film, and perhaps more to the point, excited we'd all managed to see it, thanks to Netflix. And we wanted to have a public conversation, a conversation that would normally have remained in a quick Facebook discussion. And of course, this is because of Dolores and Olivia's initiative and their management of the project. So again, it's worth noting that as an academic special issue usually takes at least 2 years to materialize from proposal to publication. And the model of the online scholarly site Mediatico allows for fast publishing and immediacy in contrast to the slow publisher-sponsored model, as I'm sure Dolores will discuss in her presentation. So I have two key questions focusing on this case study of Mediatico, and that they're on the next slide. So what contributors bring as a result of their specialisms that non-specialist film critics can't? What's the added value? And number two, what is the added value provided by expert critics engaging with popular open access digital criticism? And before focusing on some of the contributions in Mediatico's special issue on Roma, I want to highlight the paradox of fast criticism produced by scholars who are steeped in contextual knowledge that's acquired over years. That is, the article may be written in fast mode response, but the knowledge required to write it took years to acquire. So my first example is drawing from Ignacio Sanchez Prado's essay, Class Trouble, and that's the next slide. And, I don't want to go too much into every essay. What I really want to do is highlight how their knowledge can bring a contextual knowledge to the reading of the films that professional critics can't. And that's my argument in all of these cases. So Ignacio Sanchez Prado built his visual and textual analysis on the context which would not be known to professional non-Mexico specialist film critics. And I'll just read what, a little extract. He talks about Roma as an archaeology of Mexico's class trouble, focusing on the year of 1971, the time when President Luis Echeverria's authoritarian populism quashed social dissent. And he gives the context of the Alconazo and the PRI, the political party. Roma's microcosm, the life of Cleo as a domestic and care worker in a professional middle-class household, is constructed upon the uneven modernization of the so-called Mexican miracle. And he tells us about this Mexican miracle. So, this is a contextual knowledge, as I say, that non-Mexicanist critics would not have. In the next slide, he talks about the family's privileges as a direct outcome of state-funded professionalization. He explains that Antonio, the patriarch who leaves the family, is a physician at the government-run Hospital General. So that idea of the state-funded professionalization, again, the knowledge of the country in the film is something non-professionals, non-Mexicanists would have. Cleo's position as a domestic employee, in contrast, results from the devastating effects of the failure of post-revolutionary agrarian reform, including the mass migration of former peasants to the city. He talks about urban development and rural failure. He talks about social class and how it's been constructed through race, pigmentocracy, and labor regimes. So that's my point with Ignacio's, and I'm sure you can see the deep knowledge that comes across in this very fast criticism. Sanchez Prado makes learned references to Mexican film history, compares Cuarón's visual language with Gabriel Figueroa's work, yet in opposition to the temptation of the non-specialist critic to take a high-profile film from a country as illustrative of film production in that country, his deep knowledge of the industry allows him to cast the film as an exception due to Cuarón's exceptional status. In his words, it's a film that shows what Mexican cinema can be when it receives the financial support and creative freedom that nearly all other filmmakers are denied. And he name checks those who haven't received this kind of global attention, drawing attention to other Mexican filmmakers who don't have that kind of profile or support that Cuarón has had. Another strand of the special issue focuses on the representation of Cleo, played by Yalitza Aparicio. And it's interesting to compare subject specialists who take issue with Richard Brody's review of the film in the New Yorker, and in particular his issue with the way Cleo's submission and silence reproduce long-standing stereotypes. So here we have the professional critic writing from the New Yorker, criticizing the representation of Cleo, due to her silence and her submission. But as Dolores writes in her introduction, and that's the next slide, several contributions in this dossier, and she names some of us, eloquently explain how Cleo is not a blank canvas, as Brody suggests Cuarón paints her to be, but likely a pretty accurate depiction, both of his own Nana and centuries-old structural relationship between Mexico's white elite and a poor mestizo indigenous underclass, socialized to repress their own emotions and reactions in the interest of their employers. So it's not that professional critics can't engage with this structural class element in the film, but perhaps some of them haven't and take Cleo as an individual in kind of Hollywood models. The knowledge of this structural relationship that any Hispanic scholar is aware of means that none of us would criticize the fact that Cleo is not more Hollywood feisty in a realist film. They know, we know, that that Cleo, within the system she finds herself, has no other choice if she is to survive, and that, in fact, as Sanchez Prado writes, her desubjectification is a central issue across Roma. A film in which Cleo has a voice, this is Ignacio, whatever that could have meant, would altogether miss the point of her constant dehumanization. Paul Julian Smith, watching Roma in Mexico City, presents an outsider-insider view of the promotion of the film within Mexico City through his knowledge of the city and his experience of watching the film in the Casa del Cine in the Calle Uruguay in the historic centre. He acts as an academic eyewitness, and academics will know of his immense standing in the field of Hispanic screen studies, this is a highly readable piece that crosses the academic popular divide. This format allows for academic critics to present a more intimate identity, and we learn of Paul's tears on watching the scene in which Cleo loses her baby. So, this kind of format allows for a much more personal engagement from the critic than perhaps some more traditional academic publishing. Likewise, Dolores Tierney combines her personal and professional selves in her editorial, in which she narrates how she watched and cried at Roma, less as a film academic and more as a mother, and reflects on the labour given by other women that have enabled her career, something those of us who are parents can relate to. Smith takes readers inside the theatre, which is decorated in true cinephilic style with French posters of American movies, and narrates how, and this is the next slide, things got a little strange. One patron brought a banjo and harmonica with him. The elderly couple next to me would talk throughout the film, commenting on the accuracy or not of its mise en scène. In spite of my annoyance, I tried to consider this as a contribution to the study of Roma's reception in Mexico City. And he also writes of the lengthy applause. So we get this kind of extremely professional or esteemed academic, but also eyewitness account of watching the film, an audience reception study in Mexico City.
2 minutes.
The Mediatica, sorry?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. The Mediatico blog format allows Smith to combine roles of eminent academic with local reporter, and his stay in Mexico City at the time of the film's release also allowed him to comment on the way that the film was co-opted by Andrés Manuel López Obrador's government. They screened it outdoors for free in Los Pinos, the official residence just open to the public, yet his knowledge of Mexican cultural policy allows him to note the irony of the fact that AMLO, the president, had just introduced budget cuts to the arts, including cinema, and that one of the protesters was Daniel Jiménez Cacho, protagonist of Cordon Solo con tu pareja and narrator of Y tu mamá también. I've probably got about another 4 minutes, but I don't know if you want me to cut. It depends how long Dolores has. I don't want to cut Dolores off.
Mine is short. I only have 8 pages because I have no clip. So I'm okay. You can have 2 of my minutes.
Can I have 2 of you? Is that okay? Thank you. Smith's eyewitness view is shared by academic and Mexico City local Roberto Ortiz, who also recounts the experience of watching the film in Mexico City art cinema. And just to actually, this is important, he describes the nostalgic Mexican media images all associated with Roma and the next Netflix brand all over Mexico City. He also observes the debate within Mexico. So this is the kind of eyewitness element among the Euro-Mexican middle classes who share their enthusiasm of the film over the fact that they all had a Cleo, a type of nostalgia that makes him uncomfortable as it dilutes the critical aspects of the film. He also takes aim at the structural racism in his comments about the unbearable whiteness of Mexican film studies, whether the scholar is Mexican or not. So we also, I'll cut them a little bit where I talk, but I just want to mention briefly about Belén Vidal's article. Belén brings her wealth of understanding of cinephilia to a discussion of its paradoxes in an age of streaming, and provides great detail on the cinema chains and their successes and failures in securing a theatrical release for the Netflix production. Belén, I've just got a slide here as well. Belén highlights new cinephiliac film thrills gained by finding a theatre that will actually screen the film with people. Seeking out a screening of Roma in the knowledge that this may be a one-off opportunity to enjoy the cinematic experience as intended is nothing if not a throwback to a past moment of scarcity, with rare 70mm screenings organised by Netflix in selected American theatres, showing unique levels of detail. And then we also have the kind of video essay format in Jeff Middent's video essay, in which he juxtaposes scenes from Y tu mamá también with Roma to show the evolution of Cleo and Libo and Cordon's filmmaking. As Cecilia Syed argues, the video essay has the potential to turn the critic into a filmmaker and vice versa. But the critic video essay only produces good work when she or he is an expert critic, filmmaker, as Middent certainly is. Final paragraph. As Mediatico demonstrates, there is still thankfully a role for the regional subject specialist film critic, who in the digital age can be rapid response blogger or slow book or journal article author. From the case of Roma, we can see that their specialist knowledge acquired over many years of research shines a light on elements not accessible to professional critics. Academics can share their deep and historical knowledge, eyewitness accounts of cultural paratexts, theatrical experiences and audience reception, personal as well as intellectual insights, deep knowledge of the filmmakers and their corpus, their knowledge of national film histories, and the new and old transnational distribution patterns. So rather than a crisis of criticism, we can perhaps speak of a golden age of academic criticism, in a time in which we can write for our peers, our students, and the general public through the opportunities afforded by digital streaming platforms and digital open access sites such as Mediatico. Thank you, and apologies for going over.
Thank you very much, Deborah. I should probably have given you more formal an introduction at the beginning and read out the titles of your many books. But I think we really do have only 1 hour, and I really don't want to take up more time from what we can do with questions at the end.
It's fine, just Google me, it's fine.
Yeah, well, everybody has the program, and they should read it and take note. But I haven't tried to sell you short at all. And the same for Dolores then, who is based at the University of Sussex. So Dolores is going to talk about 7 years of Mediatico, the utopian possibilities of online film criticism. And I will also cut the introduction short, Dolores, to leave plenty of time. Thank you.
So hello, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. You can also Google me if you need to know anything about me. I like the idea of being a household name, actually. I'm looking forward to later being a national treasure or whatever it is. I'm not sure if that happens, but that's actually really profoundly touched me. And I feel a bit tearful just even thinking about watching Roma again. So I'm going to go ahead and play my, can you see my PowerPoint? Yes, lovely, brilliant. I need the thumbs up. I make my students have to go big because they're tiny windows, and I said I need big facial gestures from everyone. So lots of this and clapping and stuff. So let me take you back to the beginning then, to how it all began with Mediatico. On the 27th of January 2014, Professor Catherine Grant, aka Katie Grant, myself and Juan Carlos Ramos, who was then a postgraduate student at Sussex, launched Mediático as part of the open access multidisciplinary publishing platform Reframe, which was then part of Media, Film and Music, but is now part of Sussex's newly formed School of Media, Arts and Humanities. So this is kind of a sense of the platform from which Mediático leaps. In our minds, we envisaged Mediático to be a blog that would be collectively authored and which would showcase a diverse array of research, news and views on Latin America, Latinx and Iberian media cultures. And I'm very happy to be here with Stephanie and Thea and Deborah. And I think there might be some people out there in the ether who've also, I think Olivia might even be here somewhere. If she is, she maybe might say hi on the chat. Is she there? Because she should be taking a big bow, because I think that Roma dossier was her idea, okay? And then we pulled it together. So yay, Olivia, she did a great job with us with it. Okay, so in our minds then, we wanted this big collectively authored blog. We also wanted it to have impact, both within university settings as a research and teaching resource, and also beyond for a wider public. And in reality, Mediático has come to be all that and more, a research tool, a public-facing blog that reaches beyond academia, a model of open access research, and in times of COVID, a community of scholars offering analysis and information and support. So Mediático therefore strengthened my research connections with colleagues in the United States and Latin America, but also allowed me to reach out to non-academics across Europe and the Americas. When we started, we took as our model online journals like Flow, out of the University of Texas's Department of Radio, Television and Film, with the idea that we would, like Flow, offer timely reactions to new media works and current developments. So we had, for example, in terms of timely, a post in 2016 on the then presidential candidate Donald Trump and his mediatic ejection of Univision anchor Jorge Ramos from a press conference in 2015. And it came up again in 2016 because at that point, Trump was planning to visit the UK and there was a huge kind of brouhaha about it. So we brought the story up then. We also wanted to have analysis of the past, including pieces on the careers of recently departed filmmakers and personalities. Maria Elena Velasco, Ninon Sevilla, and Eduardo Coutinho. You might know Maria Elena Velasco as the director and actor in La India Maria films from Mexico. We also wanted posts that would reflect on larger issues relevant to Latin American media. Our categories presently involve, and I'm not sure if you can really see them, but I'm reading from this bottom part here, and I will give bigger images. I just wanted to grab as much of the actual posts here. But these are our categories at the moment: artists and writers, documentary, environment, film. Film tends to actually be the biggest of our categories, of course. Journalism, Latin American Indigenous. No, wait a minute, that's wrong. I think I'm missing one. I've missed one, sorry. Latino or Latina, Latinx. So we kind of shifted our terms there. Music, new media, although really, when we're talking about Netflix, that's a post from Deborah there, or we really should be talking about social media. I think Deborah kind of gestured to that when she was talking about how the Netflix experience is very tied up in our response to it. So it's kind of become like a social media. Photography. Wait a minute, I think I've mixed them up now. Wait a minute. Queer, radio, that's a podcast actually from Australia, trans, and video blogs. With many of these categories overlapping and or reflecting shifts in terminology, but always with the Latin American or Latinx focus. I really should say Ibero-American actually, sorry. I keep saying Latin America, I keep flipping into that, but I really want to say that bigger term. So in 2014 then, the main impetus for Mediático was the increasing shift towards an ethos of open access, which has now, of course, become a qualifying factor for research funding from most research bodies in the UK, the rest of Europe, Australia, and the US. Mediatical, therefore, was a means of circulating aspects of research, sometimes quick takes on that research, that we would curate internationally, but make free to a global audience with an immediacy that was much less permitted by more traditional academic publishing venues, whereas Deborah points out, the turnaround can be up to 2 years. Or more. For a book, of course, it's multiple years. Mediatical then, as a platform, took its cue from Katie Grant's pioneering work with film studies for free. Founded in 2008 and designed as a web archive of examples of, links to, and comments on as online film and audiovisual media studies. Film Studies for Free has been at the forefront of open access, which, in case you've been off planet, is a way of distributing research outputs online, free of cost or other access barriers. So 7 years on then, having published 130 or so posts and gained a readership of 111,000, and that was the one I got yesterday. This was just a snapshot yesterday, or maybe the day before. What's April the 7th? Okay, that's a snapshot of a few days of what we're doing. I don't really understand that, actually, but I do understand it, but I'm really bad at getting these stats, but here they are. So having published all this and gained this readership, we've created a public-facing open access global blog, which is actually the most successful of all the blogs launched by Reframe over the years. So Reframe's been going since 2013-14, and Mediatical continues to be its most successful ongoing blog, right? We draw on a diverse body of authors from research academics living in the global north and south, though we can always do better, and we welcome contributors who want a voice and critiques of or response pieces to any of our posts. So we're very open to people critiquing our posts, and when people get in touch with us via social media to say, I didn't agree with that dossier, or I didn't like that, we're like, please write us a post. And sometimes people do, but they generally actually don't, which is a shame. So our online audiences include, these are just normal people, civilians, a psychiatrist from New York, a cinema projectionist from Switzerland, a good deal of university students who are often set Mediatical essays for core reading, because it's got a great PDF function. If you ever want to include it as a PDF somewhere, just so you know that, the button's at the bottom. And even praise from filmmakers. So Amat Escalante himself got in touch with Neve Thornton to congratulate her on her post for Mediatical. Can you all see that? Can you see it? It's nice. I thought that was a lovely moment. Okay, so that's one of our early posts from June. Mediatical has also begun to get recognition for its utility, and it's mentioned alongside other innovations in scholarship in various publications. In their intro to the Routledge Companion to Latin American Cinemas, Ana Lopez, Marvin DeLugo, and Laura Podolsky refer to it as an online forum that's been absolutely essential to flourishing Latin American film scholarship. Whilst Rob Stone, in an article in the Bulletin of Spanish Studies, says, quote, some of the most interesting academic work is now being created and hosted on websites such as Mediatical. Some of Mediatical's achievements, including its series of public-facing dossiers or serie temáticas in Spanish, because we are a bilingual blog, on recent film releases, including Roma, Roma, Emma, and Indigenous filmmaking Abiyala, form part of Media, Film and Music at Sussex's REF environment statement. So it's that kind of work. I was quite surprised because nobody got in touch with me to tell me that, but they were like, oh, you're a big part of it. And then it's kind of in. And I'm like, that would have been nice to know, actually. But that's quite funny that they did that, but also lovely. So at this 7-year juncture, we're undergoing a website redesign. So most of the screen grabs that I'm showing you are from the redesign that is not yet live, okay? So if you go to find Mediatical and it doesn't look like this, that's why, okay? Katie is doing this redesign. Katie Grant is doing the redesign. And I'll talk a little bit though about how the funding and how it's supported. In what follows then, and maybe in the question and answer session, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Mediatico alongside some personally experienced changes in scholarly publishing that are related to open access, and think about what the new frontiers in online open access research could be, particularly in this newly configured era of pandemic-stymied research. Okay, so to start with then, some changes to scholarly publishing as a result of the open access movement, around the same time as Mediatica was launching, and compelled largely by the adoption of the open access policy for most UK, European, US and Australian public funding bodies, academic print journals were seeking ways to expand and also diversify their media from exclusively paywalled peer-reviewed journals to more accessible formats. So Cinema Journal, now Journal of Cinema and Media Studies, partnered with the already existing Media Commons in Media Res's site to ask authors publishing articles in what was already a non-paywalled part of Cinema Journal, which was the In Focus section. They asked us to produce curated videos that would run alongside print articles. And this was in 2014 then, not uncoincidentally, the same year Mediatico launched. I produced a curated video to accompany an In Focus piece on Latin American film research in the 21st century. And appropriately enough, that post was about doing research on a free to access internet site. In the accompanying piece to a posted YouTube trailer of a film called The Brainiac, I acknowledged that my Mapping Cult Cinemas essay in Cinema Journal had relied on the availability of many Latin American cult films on the internet, specifically on YouTube, and how researching in this way had felt like an academic crime. Because even if I had originally experienced many of these films in situ in Mexico, and not in a cinematheque, but bought off a street vendor at Tepito, because they wouldn't have been at the Cineteca in 2014, although things are changing. Surely rewatching these films now without context or struggle, or even a hard to find DVD, would lead to sloppy scholarship. So thinking back on this reflection of doing research on YouTube, where the films I needed were open access as they are no longer under copyright restrictions, thinking about it now in an era of the pandemic, where all we can watch is somehow streamed into our homes, but not always freely, has made me rethink the implications of free access and what it means to produce a site that is open access, and what the added benefit of an open access site like Mediatico might be. One thing I was explicitly lamenting back in Media Res essay in 2014 was that relying on research published on the internet was, as we still tell our students, running the risk of missing out on important contextual, cultural, and archival frameworks into which the films I was exploring should be inserted. This same kind of contextual, cultural, and archival awareness that is actually missing from a lot of professional film criticism. And I'm not talking about academic film criticism, I'm talking about the professional film criticism, which we kind of talked about today, is often produced by film journalists who may well be educated, in inverted commas, but still reproduce elitist and largely colonialist presumptions about our object of study, Ibero-American cinema, and think it's fun to talk about jungles and natives in relation to Fernando Mireilles' films, or in relation to Amores Perros, for example. That kind of contextual, cultural, and archival awareness that we have is not generally something that we find in professional criticism online. And I'm just sort of saying, I imagine we've gone into identity politics of film criticism at this point with all the discussions we've had today. And I think we have gone into it a little bit, but hopefully we can talk a bit more about how important it is who is speaking as well, and who gets to speak a little bit more, maybe in Q&A. So in this essay, I talked a lot about a lot of the frameworks I had from years in research and multiple articles are often missing on the internet, particularly for a younger generation who have access to an endless plenitude of freely accessible media texts and commentary without any context, without any authority. Was the journal paywall and consequent need to access through a university's library site subscriptions one way I had of checking my students were doing proper research? You know, at one point when I was teaching my students in 2013 or 2014, I was almost like no internet sites at all allowed in any essays, because I'd got to the point where they would show me stuff and I'd say, no, this is someone's essay, or this is a guy sitting on his bed. I know we say that about bloggers, but you can't have this in your essay. It's not authoritative. So this is kind of what was going on around Mediatico. And it's in relation to this fear of an endlessly proliferating source of free criticism and personal blogs for our students to read and only use as their go-to in research material that Mediatico and its band of merry and quick on the draw researcher contributors, and that's people like Deborah and Thea and Stephanie, that we've been able to fill a particular gap in the last few years. The relative ease of preparing blog posts overnight or a weekend, none of which would be possible though without some pretty excellent programming work that keeps the site current. Thank you, Russell at Sussex. This relative ease of preparing blog posts has meant Mediatico has been able to do timely hot takes on the Oscars, Black History Month, Jennifer Lopez's lack of industry awards, the Roma dossier, which, you know, I kind of forgot that it was only 10 days after it had started streaming. That's nuts. Which were all published the morning after or soon after key events. And then we kind of hooked into that publicity. These hot takes are often countering dominant and misinformed voices circulating in the media that would otherwise go uncontested. Yeah. When Roma came out, and one of the loudest voices was, and I'm mentioning him again, Richard Brody from The New Yorker, labeling it as a problematic film for its blank canvas portrayal of Cleo. Myself and Olivia Cosentino could pull together and publish a dossier of 8 1,000-word think pieces from a range of specialist academic writers watching Roma in the Global South and Global North in a variety of theatrical and non-theatrical views in less than 5 days. So I think we had the idea on Tuesday and we published Monday morning, which was Christmas Eve. I'd also like to say that I twisted my ankle the 23rd. So it actually also helped because I could just sit still, and we had no kitchen in my house. So no one was expecting me to cook. Like the kitchen had literally been ripped out. So I was actually like that domestic arrangement was actually very key to those 5 days. Admittedly, the fast turnaround meant we lost a voice or two. And it kind of pains me when I look back at the dossier and go, well, we don't have a Latin American Indigenous voice there, you know, and that's something we should have had. We also lost another female representative, you know, another female blogger, because we were doing a very tight turnaround of 5 days. And unfortunately, that contributor kind of flounced off and wouldn't let me just say, well, I'll publish it in 2 days. You know, I like to do it Christmas Eve because it's really important to get this out in 10 days. But anyway, okay. Of course, Netflix then, so pivotal and controversial in the case of Roma, is a key reference point in an argument that is related to the context in which a film is distributed and relevant to the criticism written about it. Whereas once lots of academic Latin America films could only be accessed in ways that implicitly contextualize them on university modules, on specially curated television series, at film festivals and individual screenings, accompanied by Q&As, several years down the line since 2014, Netflix has streamed all of Alfonso Cuarón's back catalogue. And there's a plethora of art and indeed popular films from Latin America, which are featured on Mediatico, including an eco-activist documentary like Daughter of the Lake.
2 minutes, Dolores.
The Two Popes, several scenes of Narcos. Sorry, I'm lost. Where am I? Chicuarotes.
You've got 2 minutes.
Including Chicuarotes. Yeah? 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Okay, great. The pandemic then has changed our viewing habits. It's closed 94% of the world's commercial cinemas. and the venues in which we see films. So theatrical release on a streaming site or via a VOD provider like Telecine Play or Netflix Brazil, or one of the various marquee platforms, Kino Marquee, I've lost Stephanie's thing, here it is, that have been established, especially with the migration of film festivals online, how the Stephanie Dennison attests in the post for Mediatico saved cinema or saved independent art cinemas. So things were changing anyways, with the pandemic accelerating the move to streaming and lessening the controversy around streaming in comparison to the one Roma went through. So Deborah's already mentioned that, but there was a kind of cinephilic backlash to Roma being distributed online, where concerns were raised over the ability of films launched on streaming sites to command the same kind of cultural impact that theatrical released films would have, as Belén Vidal went into. Roma, of course, did go on to have massive cultural impact, winning prestigious awards. So that kind of fear never really emerged. And our Roma dossier, which I was quoting just now, has arguably had the greatest cultural impact, having received the highest traffic of all our posts. Although, of course, to have impact in the UK model, I would then need to show that it has changed perceptions and ideas, which is something we haven't yet got to in tracking Mediatico's impact. I wanted to say really briefly that Reframe is funded by HIFA, which is the Higher Education Innovation Fund. So it's really important to acknowledge that it gets about £4,000 or £5,000 or £6,000 a year, which pays for its programming, pays for all of Reframe's programming. Mediatico itself is a much smaller part of that. So because we are trying to foster and encourage impact of research as the HIFA Fund demands, in our instructions to authors, we take a line not unlike that of The Conversation: academic rigor, journalistic flair. And we ask authors to be aware of what it means to write for a public-facing blog. And this means we have turned down the odd post that takes too partisan a political position, or asked for more clarity when there's a heavy focus on academic jargon. Mediatico has been a thoroughly rewarding pursuit. It's brought me a new technical skill. And as Deborah said, when you're less able to travel because of family commitments, it's enabled me to maintain an academic network of collaborators. This 7 years of Mediatico has been slow down for maternity leave, part-time work, a whole career break because I had a child and I was in another country, and then kind of back to full-time work. I'm not sure I would have coped with Mediatico if I had been in full-time work that whole 7 years. And that's not that I wasn't working full-time, but I was often at home or sitting with a small child. And I just wanted to sort of bring in a very final piece, is that one thing that's been lovely is that Netflix is showing Hija de la Laguna, which is an eco-activist documentary. Carolyn Fornoff writes to me, she's a graduate student, said, I'd like to post on it. She posts on it. Completely unrelatedly, Ernesto Cabellos gets in touch with me and says, I'm in Hove, I'm in your city. And I'm like, I'm in America. But through Mediatico, I've come to know him. And now, of course, we're all back here. And he's now a cherished colleague and in-class speaker. And this is a Zoom snapshot of him talking in my class. Sorry, that's all I'm going to say. Was I within my time? I know I said I only had 8 pages, but then I extemporized because I always do that.
This is what always happens. Yes, it always takes longer. But that was really fabulous, and you answered so many of the questions that I'd started scribbling down as well, and the way that the 2 papers work together as well. We've got one question that's come through on the Q&A from Donna Kirscher for Deborah. How can there be a new golden age of film criticism now when film productions have been shut down or radically reduced for over a year due to the pandemic? Where are the objects of study? Will it be the state of the industry itself?
My phone's going nuts.
It's, I'm really, clearly COVID has been very serious, and the streaming platforms have had, as Nuria I think mentioned, there has been a crisis for film productions as well. I guess what I was trying to say was what there is available. We're hearing more and more voices, and there's more and more access to people to publish, you know, young academics rather than, or early career, or even mid and late career academics who don't necessarily have the time, have sometimes struggled to publish. And this is a way that we hear more voices, that there's more platforms. So I guess that's what I meant in terms of, you know, I always wanted to be a journalist. I always think, you know, secretly, I've always loved to be a journalist. And, you know, I can write something that's actually been published in Newsweek and The Independent, thanks to the conversation. Can I call myself a journalist? Probably not, but I might do just for a laugh. So it's more that, you know, here's some voice of some academic who very kindly, Thea called us household names. Clearly we're not. We're known in a tiny, tiny, tiny part of the galaxy. But, you know, the fact that there are these online platforms allows us to reach much wider audiences, as Dolores was saying, with the fact that, you know, connecting with actual filmmakers who are actually responding to us. Sadly, if people are sending us articles for transnational screens, lovely as, you know, proud of it as I am, that's not going to reach outside of that academic silo. So I think what I meant by a golden age was there's just this opportunity for more people to publish at different stages of their career, and that our work is actually reaching beyond. So that's really what I meant by golden age. And, you know, we're also writing on streaming media much more. You know, the separation of film studies from screen studies is diminishing, and we're writing on, you know, I wrote a piece on for Mediatico on a Netflix production on migration. It wasn't a film, does it matter? It was a series that had important things to say. So, you know, hopefully that's a comprehensive answer.
Excellent. Do we have any other questions? Is anybody visible to me or posting in the Q&A? If not, I have a question, I guess for Dolores, about, well, it says here, do soft drugs lead to hard drugs? But do you have any evidence of people kind of starting on Mediatico and then kind of, well, you know, kind of co-opting new generations of film scholars that then move into the more academic stuff?
Oh, well, I'm sorry, I was texting there. I have a daughter whose phone is dying and she's in town. So she was texting me friends' numbers. So I'm really sorry about always doing this. But well, I think so I've had these messages from people, as I told you, kind of a psychiatrist in New York and Switzerland, someone from Switzerland. Those are the two that stick out in my mind. I should have done more research. So these are people who are like, this has given me some what Deborah was saying, this has given me some background sense of what's really going on in Roma, which you weren't getting in most online film criticism. So I don't find them now doing an MA in film or something, but I don't really have, and that would be really, if we were going to be very hyphen and impact oriented, that would be the kind of case studies that we would be doing. But I do get emails all the time from people who I don't even realize know that Mediatico is, just to say, oh, and I'm talking about them in relation to a journal that I co-edit, and they'll say, or maybe you could share that on Mediatico, because I'll say, oh, I'll try and I'm like, oh, I didn't even know you existed. You knew it existed. So I'm still not sure about how. I know it gets used, and I know that the dossier was used in classes because people could then teach that next semester. They could teach Roma because they had a text to use. Does that make sense? And it made all the sense in the world for them to then teach it. You know, and then Film Quarterly came out, but I think we beat Film Quarterly by several, you know, months, because we came out straight away. So that's my experience, that it has immediate use and effect. As long as we keep it scholarly, but we also write in a way that it's accessible, and we give footnotes and greater reading. I'm not sure about that lead on, actually. I'm not sure. Maybe someone else can tell me.
I guess, you know, you need to get your admissions department to see if they can spot Mediatico ever being referenced in personal statements.
I do want to tell you that Roma, so I taught Latin American cinema at Sussex very sporadically. I'm a specialist in Latin American cinema, but, you know, it's always had it hasn't always made, and the year after Roma, it suddenly was oversubscribed, and it's still oversubscribed. And students come having seen a whole lot of stuff because they've accessed it on Netflix. So this idea about where do we show them and what's the canon? You know, I could start a course on transnational Latin American cinema and not bother with Amores Perros or Y Tu Mamá También, or The Devil's, what else? Or Kronos, well, not Kronos, but a whole bunch of films, because they'd already seen them, you know, and I could tell that by doing a little bit of research who was taking it the following term. So that's, you know, you can draw that their canon has been expanded in ways. I know we have a lot to criticize Netflix for, but when it can show an eco-activist documentary, and it can show small art house films that we as academics would have to really run to the cinema to get in that 1 week, you know. It's just, I found it to really have helped. A lot of Mediatico's posts are about Netflix release things, because we're very aware of this kind of streaming culture, and we're kind of not snobby about it. We're kind of like, you know, even before everyone got over themselves about Netflix, we've already kind of embraced it at Mediatico, because any film is great no matter where you see it, and I don't mind if it's you know, it's not in a proper cinematheque, because I mean, I do cult and exploitation cinema, and that's always being shown in some kind of non-authoritative kind of context anyway, you know.
Excellent. Well, we are very, very sadly out of time.
Sorry, I talked too much.
Steph. But that means that everybody can carry on discussing all of these exciting topics in the social that comes later, and after more exciting interventions that Steph will introduce to you.
Okay, we now have a break, so we are going to be reconvening at 4 p.m. for our Q&A with Pablo Vilaça. So I'll see you all then. And thank you very much again to our panelists for the last panel. Really good.